This is AV SuperFriends Off the Rails, an almost regularly scheduled open discussion on audio and video in higher education. We'll sound off about our most brilliant ideas, our dumbest mistakes, and everything in between. And because this conversation will almost certainly go off the rails at some point, we'll end up covering just about everything else. And now, the AV SuperFriends. For March 4th, 2022, it's the AV SuperFriends Off the Rails. Welcome back, everybody. Time for another Friday afternoon podcast adventure. Today is March 4th. Today is the only day that is a command, March 4th. Mm-hmm. Or, as I was growing up, my dad used to call it Progression Day. He thought it was hilarious.
Forward only.
Yep.
Here on out, we're going forward.
March 4th, not march backward. Or as they say, go forth on the 5th and drink a 5th on the 4th.
Is that what it was?
My name is Chris Decter. I'm joined today by Marc, Larry, and Justin. And on today's show, we're going to discuss hiring AV and IT staff. We're then going to discuss some cabling infrastructure for our spaces, which is just as riveting as it sounds.
You guys are
but
first, for a treat.
And for, I think, the second show in a row, the non-AV related AV news. And this is more of a general article, and this article is Marc's fault, but it's a good article, or it raises some good points. I'm going to turn it over to him to discuss the reverse funnel system of skills.
We all know I love funnel plans. Love them. So this article, I've stumbled upon this article, and Chris, you have to keep me honest. I'm not even sure where you found like the original, but I found like a secondhand version of this out there.
Well, yeah, this is somebody's blog that he's posted an article he wrote, but it was actually written for the Economic Times.
Right. So all your AV news comes from the Economic Times, always in this day and age. But I was actually in the midst of kind of stumbling around the internet, just throwing some search queries at the Google around skill sets and commoditization of skill sets, and stumbled upon this article, the pyramid of skills. And I'm assuming you all just read it and were on the edge of your seat there in this conversation. But it did cause me to think a little bit about how we value skill sets in our industry. And with all the different mergers and pieces going on between AV and IT, and what that means. And it kind of, if you look at this pyramid of sorts here, the top uppermost part of this, it reads as niche skills, marketable skills, commodity skills as you go down the pyramid. And it kind of brought up the conversation, I think Chris and I had this, about where do we think AV skills sit in the larger context of skill sets? And does the industry view them the same? And kind of what do our staff look like if we're looking at this kind of hierarchy of skills? And to me, it may actually be some of the conversation around how we fit into organizations based on the skills. And kind of the long and short is the everyday skills are kind of the bottom end of that commodity skills. You have marketable skills, which are a little more specialized, and then niche skills being highly specialized skill sets, right? The reason why I was kind of Googling this in the first place is with I don't want to say the IT-ification, but the pressures to outsource where we can and save money and all that. Like, what does the industry think are everyday common skills that may just be commodity skills? So, guys, any opinions? Like, where do you think your skill sets sit on this pyramid right now? You don't. That's great.
I really
discussion
think
from the AV SuperFriends.
Yeah, I really think it depends on what aspect of my job we're talking about. Because I know I have some things I do on a day-to-day basis that are very niche, like, learning some proprietary language that is only used for one little thing. It's a niche skill. But the majority of my job, like I'm in a managerial role right now. And that takes up 60% of my day probably. Mm-hmm. Any IT person could do that managerial role. And so I think that's more of the marketable commodity skill almost at this point. Like the day-to-day tasks fall in that commodity. That marketable skill would be all the managerial things I have to do, because those are things that aren't as unique to what I do, but what they're actually paying me for is probably the niche stuff.
Right. Okay. Like knowledge worker pieces, right? Like you really want to say that you're paying me for the things I know, right? You're paying me for my perspective on how I approach these things. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with Larry. So I'm a little different in my role. I don't really manage people at WKU. My job is mainly revolved around needs analysis and formulating AV systems from a pile of boxes and doing AutoCAD elevations and drawings and setting expectations to the client of what they're about to buy. So a lot of, I would say 80 to 90% of what my job role is niche. But there's also a lot of troubleshooting skills that I do that I help other folks with that I think are more commodity, but sometimes it doesn't present itself as that, where I guess maybe my expectations are high. And this is kind of going to get into our conversation we're about to have about AV versus IT people hiring in different positions, right? So I'm surrounded with a lot of IT people. And, we find ourselves kind of going over the basics over and over again and trying to get some of these folks just understanding signal chain.
Sure. So I think towards the bottom of this article, and Chris will put the note somewhere. He'll put a
link is in the description.
Yeah. And I want to read disrupting this pyramid. The skills pyramid is never static. As technology changes, regulations evolve, some of the commodity skills become obsolete or irrelevant. What was once considered to be marketable becomes commoditized very soon. Yesterday's niche skills are today's marketable skills and tomorrow's commodity skills, right? So it kind of is constantly flowing down. And what's really interesting to me is when we look at like the quick snapshot of our organizations in the AV specific domain, I feel like our people really span all over this pyramid. We know we have some straight labor recognized commodity skills. And then we also have highly specialized niche skills. And that in itself, having people that are serving different layers of this is really uneasy for people who want to have these really clean org charts, right? And it doesn't make it easy to outsource to save money for specific things. And yes, that may be super evil, thinking it in those perspectives, but I feel like there is some of the friction just because of the skill sets we all have. You both just described having skills all over this pyramid. And yes, there are pieces of our day that are going to have to fit up and down that. But I feel like IT in general wants to move that AV skill set down this pyramid the best it can.
Oh, they do. Yeah, absolutely. With the core AV people I have around me, if myself or one of those people left, we'd be in a world of hurt. There's a lot of specialized skills there that, and also on the same hand, everybody that I just described, their title is engineer. And so when you rehire for Matt or Brian's position, Brian's a master certified Crestron programmer. Matt is, QSC level 2's done everything audio, has taken every QSC and BIAM class that they offer. There's no way we're going to be able to hire somebody at that salary rate that knows all of that stuff. And as soon as they leave, that's either going to fall on me or the other person that's still around. That's the engineer, right? And now that shifts everything around. So it's really based upon the people that you have, and you just got to figure out how to train them up. It's going to be difficult.
Well, I think everybody's kind of has some kind of project or horizon where they're looking at, okay, well, I'm going to retool and bring in new people, right? And so, and we will kind of shift into this next level thing. But Chris, I know you have asked me specifically about PDs and things in the past. Do you approach it kind of more broad, or do you want to get highly specialized and really aim for those niche skills right away, or do you keep it more like basic? Because I think there's kind of the balance. We know we need things that are existing all over this pyramid, but do you bring in high specialized and then broaden from there, or do you take kind of an opposite approach?
So the challenge I have here is that I am going to be hiring 2, maybe 3 positions in the next couple of months. What I need today, what I need in the next 90 days is not what I should need if everything is firing on all cylinders, especially in 3 to 5 years. So I'm going to hire for the 3 to 5 years from now because I need those high level skills. I need those specialized skills in very clearly defined roles. to all be part of a team, all interacting and supporting each other and all that. Right now, if I hired for what I needed today, I would need 6 people who can all do the same thing, and it's all commodity skills. Because I just need the labor force and the just the boots on the ground sort of thing. But that doesn't build anything from there. So the option is, bring in people at the commodity level, train them accordingly, and hope to grow them appropriately in 3 to 5 years, which is completely possible, but that's a big gamble. I would rather have, 2 or 3 of the commodity general, technician level staff, and then those 2 to 3 each in 2 or 3 very different roles. So they're not all the same, but project management or programming or whatever that may be, customer service sort of thing, having those roles clearly defined. But I'm hiring for those with that in mind. And that's why, yes, I've been asking all the other Super Friends and many other people out there as far as what are they using right now for general position descriptions and job descriptions and things, because I want to crib some of that some of that language out of there. The challenge being that the existing position descriptions I have here, as with many of you listening from a class or from a state institution, use classified job descriptions, and they're kind of written in this weird, well, there's some specialization in here, but it's also genericized, and you have to kind of work around that. And I think that goes back to your comment, Mark, about it makes people uncomfortable in the larger, more holistic IT world to say, well, I need to figure out how this stuff is all going to fit into this general model we have. And even though what I may do and what someone else may be doing, what Larry may be doing, and on paper, we're probably in a very similar position, but we're doing things very differently. Ideally, those would all be distinct position descriptions. If we worked at the same institution, those would be distinct, but someone wants to write those as the same and then lump everybody else in there like, oh, well, here's the manager of endpoint deployment. It's the same thing with a couple of added little lines in the position description. So that's one of the challenges, is fighting your way through the HR morass and the state classification morass of how things are defined. And I went through this at IU about a year ago. And Justin, you mentioned it before. Everybody on your team is an engineer, regardless of skill set. Everyone has, no matter what title. They do. At IU, there was like 27,000 engineers. And like 2 technicians. They all had different skill sets. They all had different responsibilities. They all had different areas of expertise, but they were all like the same. So if you get an email from somebody and don't know, and it says they're a AV engineer or design engineer or project engineer or multimedia engineer, you're thinking you're dealing potentially with a very specialized high level person on the team, but you may not be. You could be hired in at a very low level and still have that title. So it was very strange. Now, IU went through a massive system-wide reclassification, and as part of that, they again did the same thing. They tried to shoehorn everyone into these buckets, just say like, here's the 3 buckets, and we're going to wedge every single person into here. So that's a long way to go to that question of how these positions are built. And you could make the argument that, those commodity skills, and especially, Mark, as you said, the niche becomes the marketable becomes the commodity. Those commodity skills are ones you just kind of assume. Ground level, everyone's got these or can pick them up very quickly because they are not uncommon. They are not specialized. They're very generic. And even though how'd you phrase it? The IT-ification of AV continues and the networkification, there's going to be a lot of crossover there. But at the same time, there's a lot of that would be just assumed. If I'm hiring a technician off the street tomorrow, I assume that person knows how to do network deployments and configure subnets. And that's just part of the job now. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, probably not. But we have moved. Right. So that particular, whether that was a marketable or a niche skill, that has rolled down into the commodity level.
It's
and I think
ordinary
we'll continue
now,
to see
right?
that.
Those are ordinary skill sets we would hope everybody has. But so the interesting piece of this is, and it's a pyramid, and it's a very slippery slope pyramid because time is not on your side, right? As things progress, things that you may have went and spent a lot of time getting specialized training, we'll do a quick exercise here, those things are becoming less valuable, right? If I threw out, let's go back to Wayback Machine, 6 years ago, I said, oh, we're level 3 Dante. Wow, that seems like amazing, right? Let's check in today. Okay, yeah, that I think you probably need to add a base level, right? And so how fast that is pushed, like things that we thought were very specialized, now everybody was going out getting these specialized pieces, and that's just become like boilerplate, right? You're doing audio.
Well, I don't know if I go as far as to say Dante level 3 is. I would say Dante level 1 is absolutely a commodity skill.
I'll water it down a little bit, but like we would expect everybody to have some type of understanding of Dante at this point in time, like across the board. Where 5 years ago that was like, oh, cool, yeah,
well, even general. Like, if you dial it back even one step further and just say DSPs, configurable, open architecture DSPs. 5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, that was something that was like, well, I've got one or two people who really know that. I can make it work, but I'm going to break it. But these are my audio team over here. And now, like you said, for general signal routing and configuration and things like that, I would assume that every single person either has that skill or can come up to that skill within a few months. If not, that's just part of the job. Those are in every space now. You need to know those inside and out. That's not we've got 3 of those on campus. We'll get our audio person to come over here and look at that. So you're right. There definitely are things as they become more widespread or just more commonplace, or just as that skill set trickles down, they absolutely are just assumed that they are now commoditized.
Yeah, we do a lot of hiring in general, and most of our pool is IT people. And so when we write job descriptions, and I'm sure there's a lot of universities like us, there's no CTS, there's no Dante request, there's no networking requested. It's very, very basic. And then as we hire the people, the best out of the pool, we kind of see how they work and see what they gravitate to. And then that's what creates the specialized skills, is the want to do something. They get the training and so forth and so on. But it does leave a lot of open holes in our resources, because I don't disagree with you all, but to hear you all say, yeah, we want our entry level technicians that I'm going to hire at a university, Dante level 1 and CTS and all the basic stuff, that would be, I would
be priced out.
I would just fall over if I got that at Western, right? And that's just so.
And that's always the unicorn, right?
Yeah, there's going to be some problems, I think, with you all, with the bigger schools too, hiring those people because of the lack of resources.
Justin, as a point of clarification, I did not say that I expect someone to come in with those skills.
Oh, okay.
I expect them to be able to get to those skills in a very short period of time.
Okay.
If I can hire someone who's got Dante certs and CTS, great. But I'm also not hiring that person to be a entry level technician.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
if I'm hiring an entry level technician, I want them to be able to get to those. Like, here's your 6 month or 1 year roadmap. Like, very short in the larger sense of things. Go ahead, Larry. Sorry.
And I think that's the point. I mean, I'm in a similar position, I think, to most of you, where all my team has the same designation. They're all jack of all trades. It's served them well, but I've finally gotten some traction on actually hiring some of these specialized positions. And when I do that, I am looking for a higher level of qualification for those. I'm looking for a niche person because I need that in my team to make the entire unit better and to give them a pathway to move to.
If you can't find that, though, would you hire somebody that you think can get there and hope that you can train them up, or would you fail the search and redo it?
No, we'll talk about it soon, though. So I think that, like, the moral of this is that it's interesting in just how you evaluate. I mean, even think about it from yourself. Like, what, the what is it you say you do here? Where does that actually fall on the whole scheme here, right, Chris? Let me hear it.
I'm looking for it. Where'd it go?
Get it.
What would you say you do here?
Right. The things you're doing are falling on this. And just pause for a minute. Is there pressures to commoditize that and outsource that work? And would it save your university if it did? And does that open up more opportunities for you to now go and become more niche in certain spots?
Absolutely. I mean, I would make that argument that is absolutely something that every institution should be looking at as far as certain general skills. Let me rephrase. Certain general tasks can easily be commoditized and should be. Mm-hmm. And the irony being that those got to make sure I phrase this carefully. Those commoditized tasks can be handled by outside groups who are very specialized in that commoditized role and can crank that stuff. I'm thinking structure cable guys, or they will come in and do an entire building in like 14 seconds.
Yeah.
Well, in the amount of time it takes you to go find the keys to the storage room where your cable is and try to figure out where the other end of the cotter pin for the cable cart went. So there are things that absolutely should be done. I think we'll talk about it our next segment here, but there are things that you can use that model, you can flip it and then do it the wrong way, and then you get to spend 10 years sticking out of that. So
yeah.
All right. Now let's go to a commercial. What do you think?
Hit the button.
There's a great new digital magazine from Higher Ed AV Media found at higheredav.com, and we do a special monthly show where we actually stay on topic. It's a show where we try to really focus on a single topic and break it down into AV SuperFriends style. That's the AV SuperFriends on topic, found at avsuperfriends.com, higheredav.com, iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts from.
All right. Well, this next segment is going to be the same segment because we kind of rolled into it and they're very related, which is why we picked that news story. So, Larry, you threw this out on Twitter, and then, and that's one way to approach it. But thinking about that general skill set and hiring and all that, do you have your Twitter question up? How exactly did you phrase that? I don't want to misspeak.
Well, I phrased it from a programming standpoint. Would you rather hire a programmer and teach them AV or an AV guy and teach them how to program? However, I was talking with Marc beforehand, and I think this is a much larger topic. I think this goes for multiple niche skills within the IT general umbrella. And I think that's where we're at right now is, let's say, for instance, that you do have a full-time position that's opening up, and it is an higher level engineering position. Knowing where the industry is going, are you going to look for an AV guy, or are you going to look for someone who's more versed in IT and teach them AV at this point?
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of your organization does AV. You need some engineering. Yeah. Is your approach to find a person who has a background already native in AV, or somebody who has never done AV at all in their life and they're just IT skill sets?
I personally, the programmer versus IT thing, I would actually have different answers for that, because I'm kind of on the side of, if I've got a programmer, I would rather hire a true programmer and teach them AV. However, my answer is different if we're just looking at the broad IT type people, right? So if I'm hiring an engineer, just a general position, taking programming out of it for this specific conversation, I would rather hire an AV person and teach them the minimal or a few, whatever that is, skill sets that they need to get through that AV deployment that are IT related. Because IT is a very wide umbrella. Now, this is just in my specific little silo because I'm surrounded by IT people in the AV department. We have, 3 or 4 true AV people, and the rest have come from IT, and most of those work in support, and they rely on us quite a bit just to open Toolbox and open this software and just understand signal chain and inputs, outputs, and things like that. So, I might have a skewed view on it from my experience, but from my experience, I need more traditional analog AV people, and I will teach you the digital networking realm and make you understand how it relates to your skill set. So,
See, and I think I'm exactly the opposite of that.
I can see by Larry's face. Yeah, it's like, fight, go.
Yeah, and I think it's because I am an AV guy who learned how to program, and it's to me, that's the user experience. You're controlling that. You're the final. Like, if you don't understand systems, you have a hard time making that user experience good. But
I agree.
Saying that, I have seen some excellent programmers who come from the programming realm who are better or just as good as any AV guy doing it too. So it can work well either way. Where I am struggling with right now is I know that it didn't happen this replacement cycle for me, but possibly next replacement cycle, my standard system might be completely AV over IP. And if it is, do I need to start readjusting my
You need some niche
my
skills,
net
buddy.
to
Need some
get a
niche
bigger
skills.
net out to try to get a network engineer maybe to at least apply for the job. Because if they apply, I can probably teach them a lot of the AV stuff, and I would have a very strong network person on my team to help. So I just think
you raised a really interesting point about the network approach, and I had not considered that. I mean, we've talked around that a little bit, but I hadn't considered that from the standpoint of like these three positions I'm looking at. That's an interesting idea.
So this is very much like a matter of like how you see the importance of what it is you do and your ownership of those skills as what it is right now. It's fascinating because I think if you were like find the middle of the road AV person, I would be surprised if they did not come to the table with a level of networking capability out of the chute.
Right. I would agree with that.
Out of the chute, right? But they may not even recognize that as a traditional IT skill set. But let's be honest, like a lot of people who come through AV don't go through formalized IT training. The show must go on. They pick it up, they make it work, and they learn it because it has to happen, right? And so there's some secret language in AV skill sets that automatically assume you have exposure to IT skill sets. And I think understand that many of these folks may not have thought about positioning themselves as an IT worker, an IT skill set worker, or a knowledge-based worker. They just may have come out of production or theater or whatever it may have been, and they know these things. They may not know how to sell those skills when in the job experience process, but if you start to have those conversations, you can understand that, oh, you do audio, you do pro audio, you've done touring audio, and you've done Dante, so like, oh, you do networking. And they may not even come to the table and understand it as a base skill set, but it is of value. So I'm kind of skewed. If I know I have somebody that can hit these targets, so that I know they have an AV background and they do these specific things, I can automatically extrapolate they have some IT experience at this point in the game. I just feel like it goes hand in hand. Like you have to have it.
Yeah. I mean, for AV over IP stuff, when I think network engineer, I think Wireshark, and that's a specialized like network engineer. I've got 2 or 3 Netgear M4250s. I configured both of them for 2 enterprise networks to do different VLANs with different AV over IP with Dante, had both of them working for 2 different systems in less than an hour. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what that tells me is people are making network switches for AV over IP solutions that are super easy to configure, to me, which pushes down that skill set to a commodity level. Yep. And therefore, I would rather have an AV person that knows inputs and outputs and signal chain than to have a true network engineer with Wireshark open, looking at packets, configuring network switches, because that's, to me, a skill set that goes to the enterprise network on the core system. So that's just my perception. So it's kind of drawing some lines in the sand here. It's like, really, what's the networking skill set you need to make AV over IP work, right?
Well, I think
there's
that IT, there's traditional IT, like deep IT, that is very much in the software realm, right? I think what makes AV unique is we are very in tune with like the human interface of the analog experience, right? Yes. And by nature, a lot of us, I'm going to throw it out there generically, us, have a very systems thinking way of going through these things, right? We know that our success is going to be based on multiple systems interoperability working together, right? And so we know how to break these things down. And that's what you're saying when you're saying signal chain and signal flow, right?
Just troubleshooting, like how does that flow through the system? Because the network engineer is like, I don't know, my switch is configured right. Like, let's think about where the signal's coming from, where is it going, what is it doing, the size of it, what does the port, just basic information, and apply the AV knowledge to that.
I'm going to push back on that, though, because a good network engineer has that system flow side of it down. He might need to know a few different boxes, but they still know pathways.
I have yet, and maybe I'm talking to the wrong network engineers, but I talked to various ones from different states, and people can read my schematics in the AV land, and they look at my schematics from the network side and they go, I don't understand this. Why do you have audio separated from video? And why are these lines different colors? And why do you have a symbol? Like, they don't understand left to right signal flow.
Well, you don't need to anymore.
Well, yeah, I
Or
do.
do you?
And I do. I do to design my AV system.
I mean, if it's all hitting the network switch,
It's not all
There's
hitting
still
the network
there's
switch.
still directional traffic that needs to be acknowledged,
Yes.
and that all that stuff does need to be controlled. It's not the Wild West of the network. You're not just dumping
Right.
it out there. And so,
it's
well,
not.
at some of our
But I
institutions,
mean,
it's
at
not the
some
Wild
point,
West
you're
of the
not
network.
separating video and audio on the network side of things the way we used to.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
No, you're right. The hardware is the same. All these things go to the same box, but in
Yeah.
that box, you're now driving through software the different designations of what type.
You
of
want to see a
traffic
network
managing
engineer's
appropriately.
face when I say, okay, this sumbitch has 2 MAC addresses, and I need audio to go that way, and I need video to go that way. And they're like, what? Well, I don't understand. Just tell me the settings I need to apply here. And it's
There's-
just like this whole
But I
like
think there's
blank
other.
face of left to right signal chain. That's my biggest problem with this.
So I think there also is an unspoken piece here, and a lot of I will phrase this as bias for action, right? I have met a lot of IT folks that will fight you if they have to get out of their chair, right? They recognize that their job is done from one panel and a computer terminal, and that's where they're going to get all of their work done, 100%. Whereas we all know at some point something is happening in an analog environment and it needs to be dealt with. Many of the AV folks that have a background fully expect they will put shoes on in the morning and they will walk and go to a job, and it may not be behind a computer for all of their job day in and day out. And there may be a physical element of carbohydrate expenditure that they're going to have to do in the field.
You know, that is one of the very specific metrics of success for how much work you do is based on the number of steps you take. I have
By
had
the raw
someone-
definition of work, it's actually true.
Well, but I've had someone non-ironically make that argument that you can tell how productive they've been based on the number of steps they take. I'm like, well, yes, you have physically moved around, but yeah.
Yeah, but
you raise a good point. Yes, if I can't get to it from my console, if I can't get to it from my terminal,
it must not be my job.
Now I got another issue. I got to send somebody else out there to look at that. And yes,
But I mean, you've all experienced it. But what? Looks good right here. I don't know what you're talking about. My job's done. It's like, well, something's clearly still not working out there. Somebody must go out there and intervene somewhere. And
yeah. How many times have you heard the phrase, well, it looks good from my end?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so therein lies like,
By the way, speaking of network engineers leaving their desk, I had one come to my office today and say, one of your contractors just unplugged our building switch. And apparently one of these integrator contractors was having trouble with their switch off of the building switch and decided to just reboot
get rid of the
whole
building.
thing, regardless of what else was on there. Just boop, and like so there's a very old school. And Justin isn't here anymore. Justin had to leave. Sorry, folks. But that argument of the AV guy in the IT world, and he's very much in the old school AV world of, I'll just reboot it. It's fine.
Right.
Well, the thing you just rebooted took a whole bunch of stuff offline. So
yeah, now they can't get to it. And then they're like, oh, do we put a ticket in with ourselves? Who's going to go out there and do that now? Somebody's got to go out there. Oh man.
Well, they
we need
came
to hire
me
somebody with some
because
more
they knew it was
commodity
my guy
skills.
doing it. So it was one of those things where it's like they've outsourced that 2 steps down. So
Right. So interesting conversation. I think it's
so what I guess one thing that so Larry's initial question on Twitter was, are you hiring an AV person are you hiring an AV person to become a programmer, or hiring a programmer to become an AV person? And which way do you go on that? And we decided that, well, maybe that larger question is, do you hire an IT person to become an IT person to become an AV person, or an AV person to become IT? I guess, so where did we land on that? I mean, what makes sense? Let's go back to the programmer question. If I need a programmer, now as most control systems and audio systems and things have moved to higher level languages, they're running HTML5 and C and Python and Lua. Well, Lua is a scripting language, but anyway, you get my point. Is it better to hire somebody who brings that skill set to the table on day one, and then you have to explain to them signal flow and all these basics? Or is it better to have the guy who understands signal flow but might just reboot the building switch if he's having trouble as he's trying to learn programming? Larry.
What I'm leaning toward now, and it's because of the rate, in my short career, I say short, but it's been 20-some freaking years now.
you're half into this thing, man.
Yeah.
So
I have had to learn so many different languages. At this point, I'm paying more attention to the person themselves, like those soft skills, that emotional intelligence, that level of understanding that they have. And that lets me cast a wider net to make sure I'm getting the best fit for the team, the best fit for the culture, the best fit for the job. And I will help them reach whatever tool set they need to become the best at that job.
No, I like
But
it.
what are those? What are the commodity skills you're wanting them to bring to the table? Because
need to have versus nice to have.
Yeah, all these things. There's things now hiring in 2022 versus hiring say in 2012.
Yeah,
you know that person is if you're looking at attitude, not aptitude, sort of thing, but the person's bringing a whole wider range of skill set to the table. What is in that skill set that you just assume anybody looking at this position is going to have the following skills? We don't even need to talk about it.
I think they have to understand systems and systems flow, but that can be network based, that can be AV based. I'm not saying that you have to have Dante level 2 or anything like that at this point, because I've seen enough people who are network guys who ran audio at their church for years and years and years and understand enough of both that I can get them the rest of the way. Mm-hmm. So again, it's like you have to know technology, but that's a very loose term for me.
I think there's unforeseen pressures here that if you're having a very broad need, right, that I don't know this day and age you would get a legit programmer to be applying for this level. Now, every market is different. I don't think they're going to backdoor into the industry that way. But I think when you break it down and kind of what's the pillars of success for this right now, like demeanor is really important. A tenacity to learn and really want to. Folks who learn and can articulate how they like to learn and which ways they want to do it and how do they want to go about achieving more skill sets and be hungry, right? But can have a general understanding of what an input and an output of whatever the type of device it is, that there is directionality to the stuff we use is really important. And if they have a general understanding of the cables in which we use in the industry, that's like the foundations of success to me. We will build and go whatever direction they want to set forth to go down.
That progression of learning is the key. Like, I want to see throughout their career, however short it is, that they're constantly exploring new things. They're getting micro credentials. They're getting certifications. They're trying new things and learning all the time.
And one of the questions I posed to one of the recent hiring committees was, what's your preferred modality to learn? And can you speak to classes and or sessions that you felt use technology extremely well? And also, can you speak to experiences where maybe it wasn't well and what made it good or bad? Talk about that for me. And then so they understand like all the complexity of what's going on with the new teaching and learning experience, like people who can acknowledge that technology is useful and also can be a pain in the ass and want to help be a part of the solution. To me, like that's what I want. Like people who are like, there's an opportunity here, and we will open the doors to whatever opportunity we can go down. What do you want to do? Do you want to go into networking? This is a great opportunity where you can come in and get set up for success with networking. Do you want to come in and find out, I want to go into broadcast? Totally different, right? Okay, this is a good door. Come on in. We'll kind of get you there. And I think that it's multifaceted as the generic term AV industry, but it is a really big door that can go down a lot of different avenues if you want to walk through it. And I think that's the beauty of it.
You raise a good point there. And one of the things when I got here to EW was I had junior technicians understand that the progression of career was I'm a junior technician, then I'm a skilled technician, then I'm a senior technician, and I'm done. I'm like, first of all, that's how things are set up here. That is absolutely not, to your point, the wider AV industry, which is very tough to define, especially as we get into this kind of IT-ification of it. So I had to point out, no, there's all these different places you can go with it. And that really, some of them are now, kind of really passionate about that. They really want to learn these different areas because they want to build towards that skill set. So I don't know if that's just an old model here. I have never experienced that model anywhere else, but here that was the understanding, and maybe that was the misunderstanding. Maybe that was just an old model of how the org chart was built here and what was explained to them on day one. And I was like, well, if that's what was explained to you, that person did you a disservice. So allow me to rectify that right now. So it does raise some questions as to hiring, especially if I'm looking for specialized and ostensibly within an organization, senior positions, that I would expect them to bring certain skill sets to the table, and then we can build around what they don't have. You're exactly right. So it'll be an interesting process as I go through this. Like I said, I've got 3 very distinct positions that I'll be filling out in the next few months. So
keep your eyes peeled for postings. Well,
all right. Well, any last thoughts on hiring, or do we just hit the button and come back and talk about some cabling stuff?
Well, I'll say if I had to vote, I think I'm still going to lean towards AV over IT. If somebody had a broad enough and they could speak and articulate AV, I would make the assumption they know some stuff about IT, and I would be better going that route, in my opinion.
I would vote the same way. However, if you're an AV guy that is starting to get some networking certificates and things like that would really bump up the resume to me.
As many of you know, the Super Friends have always been better received when we have more input from you. So, here's your chance. Send us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and get involved with the show. We're looking for some topics to discuss, some fellow nerds to talk to, or just general AV awesomeness to brag about. But remember, we'll probably steal your ideas. And I suppose we'd take some criticism, but that wouldn't be very nice. Anyway, drop us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and find out how quickly we ask you to join this nonsense.
All right. So for our final topic today, I think we described this at the beginning of the show, as we're going to talk about cabling infrastructure, which is as riveting as it sounds. And Mark, you brought this up, and we've talked about it several times. Yeah. It's kind of like, what is our standard cabling infrastructure? Obviously, in today's world, and we just talked about the IT-ification. We all want to pick up those TIA standards and do things the right way, quote unquote. So we're all using standard cable infrastructure, or are we?
Right, exactly. And to me, this came out of my need to assess learning spaces, right? Things that have had some previous investments that maybe they're not what we think they would need to be, but what is it that we think they need to be if we're going to further invest into endpoints within it? Like, what does that mean? Jumping off, it's probably not a bunch of 5-wire and analog stuff run all over the room, but if it's not that, what is it?
Hold on, I got to return a whole bunch of
send it back. But, I'm talking about the lines in your line diagrams that when your systems integrate to one another. Like, we could generically jump off and say it's CAT. Probably, unless somebody here, we know we'd have video, we get it. So, but what would you think like a common baseline infrastructure would look like in a normal teaching and learning space? I'm not talking about the unique boutique weird things you're doing, just like the run-of-the-mill 80% classroom that you have. What does it look like today? Like what do you think needs to be there?
It's all wireless.
It's all wireless now, right?
It's all wireless. There's an Owl Labs camera in the middle of the room, shared over the wireless network, and that's it. Now, I was looking at this today as I was going through. I was double checking a bill of materials, and I could not find out why the heck I could not find the speaker cable in the listing. It's like, where the heck is I? And I standardize on Belden 6200. I was looking for that in the bill of materials. I could not find it. Then remembered, oh right, this room has Dante enabled PoE speakers.
Wow. That's like boutique, man. Like that.
Bougie.
Yeah. Cool. Like I'm all about
it. It is, but it also
he did
serves
say
a very
standard classroom.
Yeah, is that your standard?
This is not standard, but this is where we're going with it. And the reason I brought that up is because we're in this interesting world of so much stuff has moved to network enabled content delivery, I guess. And Mark, you're exactly right. It's all CAT these days. The only difference is it shielded or unshielded? And at a certain point, I don't care. There are some assumptions.
Somebody out there is freaking out right now, just so you know, because it matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. Yeah,
it's
matters.
all plenum shielded.
Plenum shielded. If I had my druthers and I could justify it, it would be plenum shielded 6A across the board. I don't care, but that seems to be a little, Larry, to your point, a little bourgeois for making a 3-foot jumper, which you shouldn't be doing either. So, but what I was getting at, and a long way to get there was, even though this particular space, I had to remember, oh yeah, there's no speaker cable in there. There is still speaker cable in most spaces. There's still 2-conductor shield cable in most spaces for control or audio wire. So we still are in this strange world of I am either making, modifying, or purchasing specialized, for lack of a better term, analog jumpers and cabling and patch cables and things. But then also heavily leveraging CAT cable. I had a discussion with one of our facilities project manager. He was trying to figure out how we were going to get literally a VGA cable from this, to this conference room table through the floor in this building. I said, well, first of all, we're not doing VGA. He goes, oh yeah, sorry. I'm in HDMI. I went, no, dude, it's CAT. It's all CAT. And he goes, well, yeah, but that's for the network. And so I had to explain to him.
It's not wrong.
Now, he is like been one of our greatest advocates now, where he loves that because that makes all his requirements for getting infrastructure from place to place much easier. I said, if you can get me 3 CAT lines from here to there, I can do all this stuff. And he's just happy as a clam with that. Yeah. But there are still people who don't kind of grok that, and they recognize, well, the computer has an HDMI and that display over there is HDMI. So logically, it must be HDMI between the two. Now, whether that's network-based, HD-based T, or some proprietary extender system, I think we're all in that world, and we would all agree it is heavily CAT-based, and we're going to be moving more and more into that. So we are crossing into that telecom networking world, and it's a weird place to be for a lot of folks.
So do you this is kind of where it'll pivot, I imagine. If I ask this question, do you treat your rooms as their own little IDF, MDF area and distribute locally and provide infrastructure point to point associated with that? Or have you adopted that it's all down the hall? Everything's down there. Like, are you bringing it all, like, what's your stance?
No, and for 2 reasons. One, I don't have keys to that room. And
Okay.
2, I learned it when I worked with you, Mark, that eventually one of those runs is going to be too damn long and you got to move to fiber, and that's a pain in the ass. So,
Okay. So you're providing kind of in the room point to point?
my switch is in my room, in my rack. I control it. I wire it. I cable it. I pull it.
So you're calling
and if
out.
I need to feed the rest of the building, I will run a line to that
Yes.
closet and a line from that closet. But if that closet goes down, or if there's a problem with that particular switch, I don't want it to take down the entire building.
Right. So you both subscribe to the concept that the classroom does not exist in the cloud. Right. It works.
Not yet on our campus.
If the internet goes down, your class will still operate because
So let me
locally
give
it
an
can still
example.
function.
We had an issue here I think it was in October. The campus firewall went down. The campus firewall itself also does the DNS resolving resolutions for campus. So you can't get to google.com, but you could still type in whatever Google, is it 4.4.4, whatever it is, and get there, and it would come up. And I recognize that. Now, all the gear we have in Classroom is either hard-coded by IP if it's older or by host name if it's newer. Now, host names resolve locally on the device. None of my classrooms went offline. All of campus had a fit because they couldn't get to your point about cloud. They couldn't get to Canvas. They couldn't get to all these services they need and use. But touch panels kept working, projectors kept working, displays kept working. All that stuff was just cranking right along, and it goes right back to the old school days. Like Mark, you and I used to do the same thing. Let's go 232 and 192 everywhere, and it works every frickin' time. There's an advantage to that. Now, as we move into a more a more mature, a more structured system. No, we're going to have real IP addresses, and we're going to have real things that we can reach from somewhere, and we can get to it from the cloud. But if campus has an issue, I don't want my stuff affected.
The cloud is not a prerequisite for success for your class to operate. It should functionally, the localized things should all work. And so, but kind of going back to the original part of this is that, so are you finding yourself going to a clean, kind of whether it's a keystone or whatever derivative of that you have in your infrastructure, if you have a location as a floor box or a wall or whatever it is, are you having structured cable provided at a clean plate? And you call that out in your diagrams and you're putting all that through and everything's just a patchable interface? Or are you still coming through bushings and things and raw cable? What level of... What do you want to see? I mean, I know what I want to see, and I can be honest about what I have. So
You're already hedging.
I was going to say that. I know what I want to see, and in my large systems, I do see that, but in my standard rooms, I'm plugging directly into the devices like you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And I know that, and I recognize that, and that was one of the things I liked about IU is they didn't do that.
It still happened.
you
it
just
still
didn't see
happened,
those
but
ones.
it was expected that it didn't.
Well, yeah. So IU, when Larry and I were both there, had a very mature AV infrastructure package driven largely by one person who's probably listening right now. Good job, Josh. Keep doing that.
Yes.
Everyone, if you have questions about how to do this the correct way, reach out to Josh
Ask
Foster at
Josh.
IU. He'll tell you all about it. Anyway, so yes, we're all trying to replicate that to here. I am digging out from 10 years of not even bushings, but someone took a one gang wall plate from the hardware store and hacked a hole in it with their X-Acto knife and pushed cables through it. And
Just bundles of cables just spewing out of the wall.
it's just, the bouquet of crap coming out of a mysterious rat hole in the wall. So we're digging out from that. But yes, I think it is not a huge lift to do. It adds one more step to say, I'm going to call out a small keystone patch or a small biscuit box or something where I can land a female termination location. And from the network perspective, those guys love that because they can move their ports right in there, and that is their final port as part of their infrastructure. They're happy with that. And then you can run jumpers from there. So it is the more correct way, I guess, for lack of a better term, to do it. It makes troubleshooting easier. It lets you know, especially if you certify those runs, you know, hey, from point A to B, this is good and will meet all our needs. If there's a problem, I know it's not that. And then you're just adding a short patch jumper, 18-inch or 3-footer or 6-footer or whatever you need from there to your device, which is the same. That is the ITification, and that is probably the proper way to do it. And I will admit we don't do that everywhere. But as new spaces go in, they're all going in that way. So the goal to be not to be terminating male-ended RJ45s unless absolutely necessary for very specialized things. But for the most part, that's not something we should be doing.
So quickly before we wrap up here, I want to say we'll do just a quick check. How many point-to-point you going from your localized rack location to your display location? 1, 2, 3? Do you have a standardized answer you use?
Well, what device in the rack?
So your floor plate, your plate or wall plate to your projection / display location.
I still do 2, but I only do 2 because I've been burnt before by networks that don't quite always, the protocol doesn't work the way you expect it to, and so I do a control. 9 times out of 10, I'm not using that control. I just like having it there in case that projector dies and I need to swap it mid replacement cycle. And I figure from here on out, I'll never have to do it again. Mm-hmm. But audio cable is cheap for that. I'm already pulling the labor. Just throw me a control cable too.
Okay. Chris, you were rattling off a bunch of stuff in your head. What were you counting?
I was trying to count. Wait, I guess maybe I was thinking of a different thing. You said how many, what was the question
point
you
to point.
asked?
So point to point from your agreed upon rackable location in your in your space to we're going to start with your display. How many? What's your density?
Projector or
2. Two is kind of what I would like to see.
It would be 2 at minimum, and there's two reasons for that. In many cases, it's AV plus data. If there's not data at that location, if I can call, like I said, in newer installs where I can call to have, and this is a uphill battle we're fighting, so give me 6 more months, where we can call to have, I need 2 data at that location.
Okay. That usually that comes that's built in.
And
it
should. So
yeah.
Anybody who's not doing that, by the way, listening, it's like, no, I just have data at the lectern and put it on my switch, and then I pull a bunch of cables through. It's like, that's fine for now, but ask them to put data up there.
I want to differentiate. This is not the network. These are not the network point-to-point I'm talking about. This is AV legit traffic, however you're getting it to and fro over a structured cable, that density.
And that's a caveat to my answer. I do have data there. So therefore, I do have another one. Right. It's just on the AV VLAN, but it's still there.
Okay.
And that's a good point. Are you having those ports? That's another question. Having those ports there assigned to your VLAN, and or is that strictly back to, say, building VLAN or campus VLAN for monitoring or something like that? But so no, the answer would be 2 in new installs. I will give that caveat.
Okay. And then
2 cat for whatever I might need them for.
Yeah. Do you, standard rooms, I don't have lots and lots of different floor boxes, so everything's kind of coming to this one floor box. What do you need what do you call out for your floor box or wall box to your IDF now? Because this is now a separate path. What do you want to see? We
have managed switches within our lecterns across the board, so it's just one back to the IDF.
Wow. Okay. So
you're talking about how many data ports do I request to go into a floor
These
box?
are not for AV proper as we recognize it, but data.
I never request fewer than 2. If I can get more than that, if it's a big room and I know I might need more than that, I'll request 4, because what I found out from our telecom guys, who, by the way, share that wall right behind me, It's the same amount of work, and
they come over to your office
Yeah.
and use that wall. Is that what you're telling
Yes,
me?
they use
That
that
seems
wall.
very.
Our network guys have 3 in every room, but only one's hot, and it feeds our
Well,
managed.
yeah, activation is a different question, but what I found out from the telecom guys is they said, honestly, it's the same charge, it's the same cost to them, whatever, if they pull 2 or pull 3 or pull 4.
Okay.
Now, they're trying to move to a model of only pulling 2 because what they found due to switch density, they're running into where all their patch panels in the IDF or MDF itself are full. So, but yes, it would always be 2 at a minimum, and the only time there would be 1 would be in those very rare exceptions.
Okay, so yeah, we try to get a 4-pack if we can, right? Computer.
I'd love it, yeah.
Yeah, computer, control subnet, blah, blah, blah. Then we have, like, if we're doing any kind of futuristic wireless sharing or whatever, that's usually not commingling on there. Then we have 1 for, like, future expansion or going back, right? As there's a
So
phone,
your
phone
IT guy doesn't do, or like your IT department doesn't like to have managed switches in the room itself.
Oh, they would.
Everything
They
goes
would
back.
love managed switches. I don't want to be trunking multiple VLANs into my managed switch they're not necessarily my domain.
We do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have, but we like to have like clean designating like this. It's much easier from our asset management to know that, oh, it's in that spigot at that box at that label. It's much easier to manage versus when you commingle all your MAC addresses on one connection.
I get where you're coming from the troubleshooting standpoint, from that like coordination with networking and telecom to say, oh yeah, it's port 101B that is having the issue.
Yeah.
In their world, that makes perfect sense. They can go troubleshoot right to that port because they did it down to that port and determine, oh, you're right, that VLAN configuration is not correct. Let's fix that.
But don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not calling out a designated line for every one of your AV endpoints and expecting to have that run back to your IDF, because I think you're going to get very thick very fast.
Yeah, and also just generally don't do that.
Don't do that. So,
I was talking with our network team here about AV over IP on campus, and I said, short term, I have no plans for the traffic to leave the switch in the room. That's going to be the level 3 endpoint is right there. That switch handles all that.
Yeah.
I said, long term, 3 to 5 years, I'd love the capability to be there if we need in certain spaces that overflow or that send around or whatever that might be. And they said, well, great, let's test that now. So they, at least here, are on board with like, let's light up those 10 gig and 40 gig links between buildings and see what happens, as opposed to no, we'll deal with that later. So that's nice to see. So for those of you listening, talk with your network folks. Definitely reach out to them now, because if you just start plugging stuff in, they'll find you.
yeah.
Which is a good way to start talking to them.
You'll get invited to talk, yes. But so structured cable. It's coming if you're not doing it. It might replace VGA one day.
Well, we've managed to ruin yet another episode of AV Super Friends Off the Rails. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. If you complain loud enough, we might just invite you on the show.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV Super Friends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.